When the dust settles, when the battle is over, when the heroes prevail and those we lost are mourned, as we pick up the pieces and life continues anew, the answer is not thousands of world-ending Star Destroyers or evil Cortana, despite being something my girlfriend reassures me isn't true. In the context of narrative progression, bigger isn't always better. What I'm talking about is the concept of narrative de-escalation, or in simpler terms, the story you tell after the big narrative climax. For reference, Phase 4 of the MCU is currently in its narrative de-escalation phase. Thanos is beaten, the day is saved. Now what? We know this new multiverse saga is going to cap off in Secret Wars, a massive war between multiple universes. The thing is, I personally don't think that's the right answer. At least, not in the way they're doing it. This has been a trend I've noticed becoming far more popular throughout the years. The plot device of, oh, you thought this guy was bad? Well, check out this guy. I absolutely hate that kind of storytelling. In my opinion, that completely disregards the importance of the previous threat and is just lazy writing. In the context of the MCU, I think they brought on this new threat far too soon. Endgame came out in 2019. Where we saw the end of Thanos, who had been built up since the first Avengers movie in 2012. However, those characters we saw in the movie have been developed since 2008. Secret Wars comes out in 2025. With no MCU movies being released in 2020, that means we only have about 4 years in between big threats. That means in those 4 years, they have to establish new central characters and then throw them at a universe-ending threat and expect us to care about them as if they were the OG Avengers. In doing so, to me at least, it completely undermines the threat of Thanos. A threat we've seen undermined in 2 MCU properties in the past year, during What If and Multiverse of Madness. If anything, the new big bad, Kang the Conqueror, should have been born due to the fact that the Avengers reversed the snap. Not a variant of Loki killing a variant of Kang. Having Kang be a direct result of the Avengers' actions against Thanos doesn't undermine him, it complements him. But this narrative de-escalation doesn't just pertain to the MCU. Another Disney property that suffers from this lack of narrative de-escalation is none other than Star Wars. Just look at episodes 7, 8, and 9. Each movie attempts to one-up the threat in the prior movies. Oh, you think the Death Star isn't scary enough? Well, how about a planet Death Star that could blow up an entire star system? Oh, you thought a Star Destroyer wasn't big enough. Well, how about a Star Destroyer that's the size of like 6 Super Star Destroyers? Oh, you thought the Death Star and Starkiller base was too weak. Well, how about every Star Destroyer is a Death Star? You see my point? Those ideas, while being really dumb, completely undermine the threats established in prior movies. What's really interesting is when looking at George Lucas's original idea for the sequel trilogy, he actually understood the concept of narrative de-escalation. In regards to his sequel trilogy, George Lucas states, episodes 7, 8, and 9 would take ideas from what happened after the Iraq War. Okay, you fought the war, you killed everybody. Now what are you gonna do? He would go on to explain how the main threat would be Darth Maul, who has built up a massive underworld criminal enterprise as Leia is working to establish the Republic and Luke the new Jedi Order. The threat isn't galaxy-ending, and there aren't any new super weapons that blow the Death Star out of the water. If anything, the threat is far more personal. It's about the underworld of the Star Wars universe. There isn't a new empire to rival the New Republic and take over the galaxy. No, it's simply about the characters. It's personal, which is exactly how to properly handle narrative de-escalation. An example of a story that almost did narrative de-escalation right would be the Halo series. The original Bungie Halo games were all about how the Covenant wants to fire the Halo rings in order to go on the Great Journey, with the threat of the Flood looming in the background. Halo 3 ended with the Prophet of Truth dying, the Covenant being destroyed, and the Flood being eradicated. Then we have Halo 4, 5, and Infinite, where each game attempts to one-up the threat in the prior games whilst also trying to tell a human story. The thing is, you really can't do that. Halo 4 got the closest to actually achieving this, but even then, there was a literal Death Star run to stop the Diadact from destroying Earth at the end. Halo 5 lied to us in the marketing to make us think that this would finally tell us that human Master Chief story we've been seeking. But again, no, they just made Cortana evil space Hitler who turns all the AI against their creators. Then Infinite wanted to bring us back to basics with a Covenant-like threat on an actual Halo ring, and it was great. But then they introduced the Endless, a threat quote-unquote worse than the Flood that even a Halo ring couldn't destroy. As I've mentioned many times in this video, by doing that it completely undermines the prior threat. The Halo sequel trilogy should have been one of Chief finding his humanity. Back to Lucas's quote, "Okay, you fought the war, you killed everybody. Now what are you gonna do?" What use is a living superweapon when there's no war to be fought? It really hurts when I look back at what Halo 5 could have been in the marketing material, because that would have been an amazing trilogy. Essentially, those who Chief fought for turn against him. The threat shouldn't have been the Didact or evil Cortana or the Endless. No, the threat should have been humanity. It should have been Oni. I mentioned this briefly in my Halo vs. Arcane video, but what the Halo show did with Chief going AWOL with Quan as he slowly regains his memories and learns the horrific truths of the Spartan program, that should have been what the plot of Halo 5 was. Obviously written better than they did in the show, but you get my point. Chief is asked to kill insurrectionists, the original purpose of the Spartans, but he refuses. He then goes AWOL, and Fireteam Osiris is sent to bring him back as Oni launches a smear campaign against him. The key to perfecting narrative de-escalation is by telling a personal human story. The last example I want to bring up today is about the upcoming Mass Effect 4. See, Shepard was in the thumbnail for a reason. While at the time of writing this, we know next to nothing about the upcoming Mass Effect game, so we can speculate a little. Based on the trailers, we can assume that the Destroy ending is canon, and Shepard, along with the original Normandy crew, will most likely be returning. That's really all we know. So time to pitch an idea. The only way I could see the new series of Mass Effect games working is if they tell a personal story. You don't need to tell another story about another eldritch abomination coming from dark space. Think about the state of the galaxy post Mass Effect 3. For the first time in galactic history, the species are unified. But how long can that unity really last? Because there's no such thing as a true utopia. So I could see this Cold War of sorts brewing between the galactic civilizations as each one tries to claim absolute power as they pick up all the pieces post the Reaper War. However, there is a looming threat in the background. What is that looming threat, you might ask? Dark energy. For those of you who are unaware, the original ending of Mass Effect 3 essentially boils down to the fact that the real reason the Reapers were harvesting organic species was because they wanted to stop the heat death of the universe. Essentially, the universe is not infinite, it's finite, and organics will eventually reach a maximum level of entropy, causing everything to end in one big bang of sorts. We saw a hint of this during Mass Effect 2 during Tali's recruitment mission on Hailstrom, as its sun was strangely becoming a red giant far too rapidly. Imagine this, a cold war between intergalactic species is slowly brewing whilst in the background dark energy is causing the heat death of the universe. In this case, the antagonist isn't a quantifiable threat, it's literally energy. How do you stop energy? The real villain of the story would be how the different societies try to counteract it. Gosh, can you imagine a more human story than a potentially cataclysmic natural disaster looming in the background as governments bicker amongst one another about irrelevant reasons, completely disregarding the threat? No, it's totally not relatable in the slightest. If BioWare takes the story in that direction, then the new Mass Effect game would be phenomenal, because that new threat doesn't undermine the Reapers. If anything, it paints them in a new sympathetic light because they were literally trying to save the universe. My point is, once you have a massive universe-ending threat, the key isn't to one-up yourself, because in doing so, you undermine your prior threat. The key to narrative de-escalation is to tell a more personal and human story slowly by building up a new threat that doesn't undermine the prior threat, but complements it. When doing so, you not only create a much more compelling story, but a natural progression for the characters that doesn't feel undeserving. Because the story of you fought the war, you killed everybody, now what are you gonna do, is much more compelling than this guy's like that dude, but like, worse. When Thanos' snap was undone, that should have led to the inevitable birth of Kang. When the Empire was shattered, that should have led to the struggles of rebuilding a new government. When the Covenant was destroyed, that should have led to an identity crisis for Master Chief. When the Reapers fell, that should lead to the true threat of dark energy and political chaos. Don't undermine the prior story. Complement it. Or actually, I have a better idea for the new Mass Effect 4. Instead of all that bullshit I just said, how about the new threat comes out of the dark space and they're called the Reverse? And instead of a giant robot squids, they're like giant octopi, and then they could blow up planets with like one big laser blast and turn people into even more like even dangerouser, like the even more dangerous husks, and then they're green too, so they're different. And they're super cool and way more dangerous than the Reapers because they took over the galaxy in like 1 year, despite the fact that Commander Herder told everyone that they're coming and nobody believed them, but they actually knew were right. And they were totally immune to all the Crucible because they're like only hurts the Reapers, and the Commander Shepard uses the Force to teleport himself across the galaxy to stop the Reapers because they took his nephew and blah, 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 and all that stuff. Yeah.